Oh, hello, guys. Welcome to this new edition of my podcast. This is Aadit Kapadia, and I have a very special guest with me today. He is the most popular Canadian commentator, and I would say, I was just told, a comedian on Indian television right now, Daniel Bordman, who's been, he's been talking, he's a journalist by day. He has been giving some fantastic insights into the Indo-Canadian relationship. I should say journalist by day. He is a journalist. That's
journalist by day, comedian by night is how we roll.
Is the accurate? Yeah, no, but you can be both a comedian in the day and journalist in the evening.
Canada's not a serious country, so our journalists shouldn't be too serious, right? If the country's going to be declining in front of our face, you might as well have fun with it and go out with a laugh.
Yes. But I most important introduction is he's the most popular Canadian on Indian television right now, especially on news, Daniel Bordman. And the second most featured Canadian, because I think the first one would be Justin Trudeau, but in a popularity contest, you're going to beat him like about 3-1 in India, or maybe even with bigger odds.
Maybe bigger.
Bigger odds. No, I mean, jokes apart, I appreciate Daniel joining us. He's written some fantastic threads on it, done an excellent 14-minute video, which I would recommend everyone to see. A lot of people who listen to our podcast or view us in North America and UK and are not familiar with what has happened or the nitty-gritties of it, I'd actually tell you to go pause, watch that video, and come back, because we're going to reference that video and a lot of things that I've said. Daniel since has done many shows, and if you really have been living under a rock for the past 3.5, 4 days, here's what happened at the beginning of the week. And yes, guys, it's not even been a week. It's only been 5 days. Monday afternoon, there was a session in the Parliament, in the Canadian Parliament in Ottawa, where Justin Trudeau makes the statement that the killing of Harjit Singh Nijjar, where I think he said there was credible allegations, if I'm not mistaken, the term
of a potential link. Credible. No, in Justin Trudeau's perspective, a credible intelligence report, that has a potential link to the Indian government. This is what we started a diplomatic war with.
Yes, so there was a credible that the Indian government was involved or potentially involved in this killing, and then suddenly from a death investigation, it turned into a diplomatic row about whether this was a state murder and so forth. And what's interesting is, obviously, when you make a statement like that, the Parliament usually echoes in one voice, because that's what happened in Canada. But then instantly, even from sections of the Canadian polity, you saw a bit of backtracking, saying, we haven't. So Pierre Poilievre made one statement on one day, and then the next day he said, but I haven't seen the proof. And then he talked about the whole China issue, where Justin Trudeau wasn't really forthcoming, where there was definitive evidence and so forth. So that's one part. But the second part was, then India woke up Tuesday morning, and there's no no pun intended there, but it literally that's what happened. And all sections of the Indian now, for anyone who's been following Indian politics, the BJP, Congress, Aam Aadmi Party, that's the party in power in Punjab, there's a lot of few things that they can come on a consensus with. And this was a strange week in Indian politics. So they came on the board to pass the Women's Reservation Bill in the Parliament, and taking that consensus further, there was this condemnation of what happened in the Canadian Parliament. And there are two things here, before I get in, Daniel, that I want to talk about. The first is the morality question and stuff on whether, was there an Indian government hand in this and so forth. That question you can only answer if there's definitive evidence. Otherwise, we're dealing in hypotheticals, and geopolitics cannot be dealt in hypotheticals. Second is the media question, or what's the perception. I'm here to tell you, if the Indian Prime Minister is accused of doing, or the Indian government is accused of, taking care of business against a Khalistani separatist, it's going to play out very well in domestic politics. Whether India did it or not is immaterial right now. And that's exactly what happened. And that's why the opposition parties are like, oh, we have no choice. If we come out against this, the domestic people are like, oh, are you going to support someone who really is not in favor of India, or is in favor of balkanization of India by advocating a separate state out of India? So those are like, the talking points. So Daniel, I want to get your initial reactions, and you've done so many shows, you've spoken to so many people, so what has been your sort of understanding of the issue since, and where are you placed now on it?
Well, I'm still kind of in the same place. how much swearing is on this podcast? Do we keep this PG-13 for monetization?
You can go for it.
Okay, so I mean, the only real way to
And
describe
we have
this.
warned it for people. There is going to be some cuss words. We won't.
Oh,
We'll promise
yeah, I
to be a
mean,
little bit.
there's no way for me to do the section of what was Daniel thinking. Listen, I saw Trudeau kick the Indian premier out. I saw what he said, potential link in whatever, and I basically went on Twitter and went, "What the fucking fuck are we doing? This is ridiculous. This is insane." And I remember like thinking while tweeting it, I'm like, this is a thing that we could do. Like maybe I'll just, should I swear or not swear? Like, okay, fuck this. And I called Trudeau batshit insane. And then I made my point of just how crazy this is and how it's going to go so terribly. And then that got some virality, like got retweeted by like a major BJP. Then I'm like, oh, whatever. And then I was still kind of in that state of like, I can't believe this is such a mistake. I mean, the 14-minute video, if you want to see it, it's pinned to the top of my Twitter page. But I said like initially,
I'll tweet it out, link to the podcast, so people know.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I mean, people will find it. My initial reaction is sort of like, oh, this is the second worst geopolitical disaster of my lifetime. The Iran nuclear deal, I say, is number one. That one, I don't think it'd ever be topped. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen. But this was like, what are you doing? What do you think is going to happen? And what I think is going to happen is we're going to lose a diplomatic war. There's no leverage. Like, I mean, for Indians, there's a common North American saying, don't bring a knife to a gunfight. This is the better equivalent of Canada versus India in this row is, don't bring a picture of a knife to a gunfight. We don't even have a knife. We don't even have the opportunity for a lucky, like, it's a picture of a knife, and this is the geopolitical imbalance. So we have no leverage here, and you make a very good point. Harjit Singh Najjar is not going to bring world sympathy towards Canada. Okay, it absolutely matters when it comes to geopolitics. Geopolitics is hardcore. It's more of a trolley problem type thing of sometimes you got to sacrifice things to get better gains because the lives of millions and then the economy in billions is kind of on the line. So you have to make hard moral choices. That's the reality of geopolitics. So if you're going to start a war with your ally, you got to have something rock solid to say, like, because there is something to say, like, we should protect territorial integrity. You don't want to be seen as a country that needs to have foreign nationals do extrajudicial assassinations of terrorist leaders. Like, you want to be a country, if you're a functioning country. If we were a functioning country, he never would have been here, or he would have been extradited, and he wouldn't have been a leader in the community or whatever. And then this doesn't happen. But we allowed this problem to fester. And when the international community sees a guy with an Interpol red notice on camera shooting, talking about ethnic separatist violence, they're not going to come to the aid and be, oh, woe is me. It's not going to get the hearts and minds of the random, 55-year-old couple in Kansas who just flipped on the news to see what's going on right now. They're not going to sympathize for him. This would be a completely different scenario in the hypothetical created where if the Indian government was accused of assassinating this 12-year-old girl who I'll nickname Little Miss Khalistan, who was just really cute, wearing a Khalistan dress, twirling in a field, talking about world peace and all this different stuff and why Khalistan is needed. And she goes viral, and then the Indian government, kills her. This is a different thing. This is a completely different apples and oranges thing on how the geopolitical reaction is going to be. But the Canadian government had to be smart enough to actually look at who was killed here. And the other thing is, there's tons of Khalistani gang violence in Canada. So how can we sell to the world, especially India, who knows this? I mean, the rest of the world probably doesn't, but the Indian government definitely knows this. How do we sell to them that we know beyond a reasonable doubt? Like, you have to go to war with an ally on this, especially an ally that is geopolitically stronger than you. You got to be rock solid. They'd have to be airtight. And
then there's two things here, right? To add to that, the other country that's opinion would be very significant is the UK, because they too face the Khalistan problem, maybe not as extensively as Canada in terms of proportions and percentage, but they do. And UK has been very strategically silent. They've made a few noises, but it's not been as definitive because, you don't want to be on the same side as, Hardeep Singh Nijjar. And okay, I think people would have been more sympathetic to the point that Trudeau made about, like I said, I completely support, like, if, no country wants foreign governments basically acting on their or taking care of business on their soil. But you could have had reports in the CBC that did not call him just a Sikh activist, but called him a Khalistani separatist leader. Like, as not just a man who runs a plumbing business, as some sort of like this Canadian immigration story.
I mean, you don't have to call him a terrorist, But you don't have to call him a religious leader. I think you hit it right. He should be called as a Khalistani separatist leader or Sikh separatist leader or some sort of separatist leader. Like that should be what we're calling him, because that's definitively what he was. He lived his life quite openly and vocally about separating the Punjab region off of India to create a homeland for Sikh people. That was his goal, was a Sikh separatist.
That's what pissed off a lot of people, because after the Trudeau event, there was like some calculated leaks in a lot of, Canadian government or pro-Trudeau media in Canada, where we actually saw reports like he was an activist and so forth. And we're like, no, he wasn't. So if, say, that CBC report contained a paragraph explaining what Khalistan was or what the legacy was, and then you also have to understand, Daniel, and you may have heard this on Indian shows, or there is a historic legacy, because India and Canada have gotten along very well under Stephen Harper. I think it was a phenomenal relationship or something.
Yep.
But India just has not gotten very well along with the Trudeaus, whether it be Pierre Trudeau or Justin. And the biggest bone in the neck has been their stance on Khalistani issues. The AI-182 bombing, which was one of the deadliest airplane attacks since till 9/11.
It's the worst terrorist attack, most deadly terrorist attack in Canadian history.
Right, but I'm saying even on North America, I think.
But I'm saying from our perspective, like I'm going to make this point. Like I'm going to make this point in Canada. I believe in free speech. I believe you can advocate for whatever geopolitical things you want. You can advocate for a separate, Zoroastrian homeland in Australia. Fine, it's your free speech, right? Violence is the thing, but the Khalistani movement, you have the right thing. They're enemies. They're the worst terrorists in Canadian history. They blew up the airplane. They've assassinated or attempted to assassinate Indian officials, Canadian officials. There's been ongoing violence and terrorism inflicted on Canadians for decades. Right. And so it's not just India that should be having a problem with this. It should be Canada who has a problem with the Khalistan. It
should be, yes. And unfortunately, it's a strange situation where India will not be geopolitically, yes, they don't like what the Khalistani, folks are doing. But in Punjab, there's no real, wave for the Khalistani movement, not since the late 90s or something like that. You'll find sporadic here and there people jumping up and down, but it's like it's a democracy. You will have people that don't agree or subscribe to a crazy point of view. But the thing is, there were a lot of funding issues. Where was the funding coming from? And a lot of funding led to some folks in Vancouver or some folks in Brampton and so forth. And that's why India was concerned. Like, can the Canadian government act and clamp down on the funding? Absolutely. That's something they should have shared evidence and stuff. But moving even on from there, you have Geopolitical Pannu calling for attacks on Hindus and the Indian diplomats and stuff on Twitter, and he was called as the lawyer of this, and I'm like, are you freaking out of your mind? So that's what pissed off a lot of Indian stuff, and that's what led to the reactions. But do you see a two-sided opinion on Canada as well? Because I think Indians are not really getting an opinion of what real Canadians on the street might be thinking. 15 people in TV studios in Toronto might be thinking something else, but 15,000 on the streets of, New London or many other places might have a totally different view of this.
Yeah, I mean, like all societies, we're a bit politically fractured right now. So you hit it right. Like, do I represent the average Canadian on the Khalistani India issue? No, I'm a little bit above the standard deviation of the mean on terms of understanding the issue, and I get that. Where's the average Canadian? A lot of them didn't know much about this, but Canadians are very curious people, and we like to be empathetic, and we like to be liked. And Canadian society generally wants to be friends with India and everyone. And, we want to get along with Sikhs and Hindus and Muslims and Jews and Christians. Like, we do truly want this. So the general Canadian population, there's no hatred of India widespread, outside of like the radical leftist circles and the Khalistanis and the Islamists. But wider Canadian society, there is zero animosity to India whatsoever. It is a very friendly demeanor. I think most Canadians would, we have some sense of honor. We were kind of born in World War I, World War II that time, so we respect the men who fought and died beside of us. That's sort of our general view of India, and a lot of Canadians would be very sad here. Now, there's those who go and listen to the Canadian talking heads on TV, And like they might be full on Trudeau. They might like it's the TrueAnon, right? So there's a bit of a cult of personality of Justin Trudeau. Same way in sort of Donald Trump. Like if Donald Trump came out and said, you know, the sky is green, you would be getting a bunch of people yelling sky is green. So Trudeau has where Trudeau has now said, I have top secret evidence that you know it's in my heart, the heart of hearts, the most pure heart, that the Indian government may be aligned with it, and then you know you'll get you know a bunch of journalists and people going up. But there's also this major disconnect between this sort of technocratic elite journalistic class and like and what just separates them from everyday people, because the concerns of like Canadian journalists are like this fringe gender diversity stuff. And when we did the polling, like 80% of Canadians are not in the hardcore gender stuff that, but the media portrays it as a majority opinion. So you have this lots of you know different factions, and Canadians will take a while. We're not the fastest people on these things, but like when push comes to shove, what we get going, we can be very, very effective. So Canadian society is going to probably work and understand, and then when we get understanding, and if we get embarrassed geopolitically, like then I think you'll start to see a lot of rabble rousing within the sort of center urban areas that the Liberals mine votes from.
No, and I think it's another interesting thing also that geopolitically Canada and India have to lose, and Canada obviously a lot more to lose in this, because even if you know US and UK were to go to support and stuff, but if India and Canada trade talks stop, if there is you know less Indian students coming into Canada, or the visa like or the Canadians are denied, like you know there's no Indian visas that are opening, that's actually going to affect Canada and India. You know the other countries are just going to like weigh in with their opinions and stuff. They're going to continue business as usual with them. So I think that's what bothers me. But also I think on Indian media, I think there's also a sort of not an understanding, like not any understanding of an average Canadian. Like you said, they are not they had no idea about 90% of Canada, I'm not kidding, has no idea about the extent of the damage of the Khalistani issue till about 2 weeks ago, or till about a week ago. So in a strange sort of way, one unintended positive effect is now people are asking questions about, oh, what is this Khalistan? Who was this guy? What ideology? And if you look up Hardeep Singh Nijjar on Twitter, that's what's going to happen. But that brings us to you know the other problem child of Canadian politics, Jagmeet Singh.
Ah, yes.
I mean, I refrained from mentioning him for the first 17 and a half minutes because, you know, I wanted to keep this conversation about people that matter. But unfortunately, for the next 2 years,
now.
He matters now. That's exactly what I was going to say. He's in the ruling coalition, and Trudeau cannot stay in power because Canada, like India, is a parliamentary democracy. So you need the allies. So how do you deal with that? And strangely enough, the genie's sort of out of the bottle. Will Trudeau bottle it in, or is he going to throw out the bottle itself?
Justin Trudeau has never been shy to throw people under the bus. He's shown some self-serving interest. However, I think it's important to understand for people outside in India and America who want to just understand Canadian politics. I don't see this as a matter of votes. This is more a matter of surviving to 2025. After 2022 in the Emergencies Act invocation, there was some rose, and this is when the Liberals and the NDP made this sort of quasi-coalition. It's a coalition in everything but name only, so the Canadian elites can say it's not a coalition because there's no NDP people in minister. That's Canadian politics, but it's a coalition in everything but name. The Faustian bargain I outlined is Justin and Jagmeet sold their souls screwed over their parties for personal gain. So the reason why there's never been a Liberal NDP coalition is because it will destroy both parties. It's a first past the post parliamentary system, so they do split votes. Right. The number one thing Canadians want, especially in urban centers, is they don't want a moderate politician. They want a politician the media will tell them is a moderate. That is their number one priority. So the Liberals kind of dominate Canadian politics by being the so-called moderates. They need to go on TV and say, we're the reasonable ones. Look at those conservatives over there to your right. They're racist, homophobic, transphobic, all the phobias and the isms. Don't do that. But we're not crazy. Look at these crazy socialists on the left. We are the adults in the room. We will provide peace, order, and good governance. That's the Liberal pitch. The NDP pitch is, we're the real socialists. The Liberals are fake Liberals. They're corporate elites. That's the Uniparty. The Liberals are considered are owned by the corporations, and the corporations are doing corporation-y things, and the corporations are bad, and we need to tax everyone at 4,000%. This is very fundamental to how they get votes. But if they merge together, this is what happens. The Conservative Party is great because then they get to go. We're the moderates. The Liberals are in bed with the NDP crazy socialist ding-dongs. They're no longer moderates. And the Liberals lose their sort of we're the moderate reasonable ones because they're in bed with the NDP. And the NDP lose their sort of we're the fringe underdog, not part of the establishment. Vote for us, we're the outsiders. The other parties are corrupt. We're for the people. So they lose that by going into bed with the Liberals. So it's a real strong push for the Conservative Party. So why would the two leaders of the party enter into this bargain? And the answer, if you're looking for one, is probably, what do those men stand to gain from this coalition? Justin's side, he has a minority government, and he was facing a scandal, a big one in the Emergencies Act, where so this is also important to know, Indians. He invoked the Emergencies Act, martial law, based on a report, a CBC article that was later retracted as fraudulent. So a CBC fraudulent CBC article. Yeah, so a fraudulent CBC article that was later retracted was then picked up on and reported on by the RCMP, and then that was used and cherry-picked by the Trudeau government to invoke the Emergencies Act. So CBC is also government news. So it's not a private government, private news channel that just happens to be funded by the government. It is the Canadian government's thing. And it's different than the government. It's essentially the Liberal Party press release center. Even when the Conservatives govern, it's the Liberal Party press center. So this is all very important to know. So Justin Trudeau, what does he get? He gets protection from any potential investigation. When he was in the majority ruling party, he's able to appoint the person to investigate him, and he's basically able to like each party gets a certain amount of seats on the jury, let's say. So if you have Liberals and NDP who make up half the jury, the Conservatives vote guilty, the Liberals, NDP vote innocent, they get off. So he's scandal-proof. He's scandal-proof for 2 more years. What does Jagmeet get? He gets his pension in 2025. So, if Jagmeet Singh, the NDP's broke. Shockingly, the Socialist Party can't run the finance as well. But the NDP's broke. Jagmeet Singh's destroyed the party. He's deeply unpopular within sections. He maintains power through the sort of, you're racist, you get rid of me. The NDP used to be for the working class union worker, but it shifted Jagmeet to the intersectional 20-year-old girls taking gender studies. He's on TikTok going to them. So if there was another election called, it's likely the NDP would have wanted a new leadership race to get someone else in to raise money, to get money into the party, and then try again in the next thing. That happens, Jagmeet doesn't get his pension. So you can see why they're potentially
Here's the strange thing also about NDP, and this I'm saying from their own website. Jagmeet stood for elections in the NDP in 2017. And I think March 2017, NDP's membership was like 41,000 or something. And a few months later, they tripled to 124,000. And surprise, surprise, Jagmeet comprehensively wins the election. So suddenly NDP found members to, more than double what they were. So I was on podcasts and I've listened to that even the takeover of the NDP is a very interesting
internal party politics in Canada. It's fucking wild. It's the Wild West. It's corrupt backdoor Chicago politics. But Canadians don't want to hear it. They want to keep their head in the sand. And as long as the general election is kosher, the Canadians will be fine with it. But Canadians don't really know just how much backroom dealing is going on in our elections, or internal party politics more specifically.
Exactly. And I wanted to say, because when you have things like this, it becomes like this discussion of survival and stuff. But knowing this context is very important, because Jagmeet has had this pro Khalistani messages, refused to had done a flip-flop on the AI 182 or something, and Justin Trudeau still had no qualms in going to the alliance. So that angered a lot of people. But then coming to the Indo-Canadian relationship, so Justin Trudeau made this statement about the Indian government. Jagmeet took it one step further and suddenly started talking about Narendra Modi on social media. And here's where it got a little angry on the Indian side as well, because actually on this, the Congress, the BJP, and others have all spoken sort of in one voice. And I have a million issues with the Congress, but I cannot fault their statement or what they said on this. So it's not really a Modi versus thing. It's not like people in India actually actively oppose Mr. Modi for, going up against Khalistanis. Every Indian I've talked to in the last few days seems on board with this, even if this hypothetically were to happen. And that's where we're losing sort of the plot. But where do you see the Indo-Canadian? Do you think there's going to be a freezing of the relations till Justin Trudeau's in power? Or do you think there's going to be some thawing? Because yesterday evening, I saw Harjit Sajjan and all of them tweeting against the statement of Pannu saying, oh, it was just basically playing to the gallery, but you can't just bash the Hindus and tell them to leave Canada and stuff. But I thought that was interesting that after years, they finally thought, this Pannu might not be a good guy.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of hubris going on here in the Liberal Party, where they thought they could just say whatever they wanted and none of the demons buried under the rug would pop out. And when trying to, the Canadian government's first thing is we don't want backlash against the Sikh community, right? So Khalistani does violence and threatens to kill all the Hindus. Our number one concern in Canada, of course, is what will the backlash against the Sikh community be? And I hate this for a lot of reasons. One is the Khalistanis and all radicals, what they love to do, and it's the most noxious thing they do, is they wrap themselves off in religion or whatever other movement they can. And they say, we're not Khalistanis, we're Sikh human rights leaders. And then they do ridiculous things and they get that umbrella put over the rest of the Sikh population. And then that brings backlash onto the Sikh population. They experience backlash. They feel isolated. When you feel like that, you're more likely to turn to an in-group. Who's going to be there to protect you? Oh, the Khalistanis, right? This is why they do it. It's a bit of human behavior. So I hate every aspect of it, right? And Canada's been a land where this has been allowed to fester for decades. And we're seeing it now. So do I believe Harjit Sajjan really cares about the Hindu community? No, he was the defense minister and there was a Sikh Indian colonel who was like, I'm not shaking your hand. You're terrorist.
No. Amrinder Singh, who was the chief minister of Punjab. The chief minister of the largest
Sikh region where the alleged Khalistan should be.
He refused to meet Harjit Sajjan, and he said Amrinder Singh actually came out very strong. I knew Captain Wood, so Amrinder Singh and a captain has been in all three parties, but he was in the Congress. Now he's with the BJP, and no one in the Congress actually took him on this issue at all. He actually said that I gave a list of people to Justin Trudeau when I met him in 2018, and this guy was on the list. People you should watch and stuff. So Captain Amrinder Singh has been on the forefront.
Oh yeah, he's a old school Daniel favorite from way back when.
And I have to tell you a very funny story about him. So he actually had an election in 2014. He went up against the BJP's Arun Jaitley, and they were in the Lok Sabha election in Amritsar in Punjab. And he was fighting from the Congress, and he won. Mr. Jaitley lost, even though Mr. Modi won in a landslide. That was one of the few seats that went the other way. So he was asked when they met at a walking park while campaigning. They greeted each other cordially. So Amrinder Singh was asked, "Oh, you greeted each other cordially?" He's like, "What are we, man? Military men fighting in a battle for our countries? We're political opponents. Of course we're going to meet." And then so he is an old school politician where if he sees bullshit, he's going to call it out. And so this was bullshit, so he called it out.
Yeah, not a lot of people like that in the world. You got to treasure them when you can find them. Not a lot of them make it into politics or don't get corrupted. Yeah. So yeah, he's an OG and has had my stamp of approval ever since I heard that story way back when. It's.
But I want to talk a little bit about how this played out, because 20 years when Stephen Harper was the prime minister, you did not hear, you heard about this Khalistan movement in Canada and stuff, but it was not a movement. Most of people thought it as a bit of a joke. It was not threatening in terms of, even Indian politicians privately they would say, yeah, okay, they can make the noise they want as long as they're not threatening India or something. It is what it is. We are obviously opposed to them, but they're in a sovereign nation. We can't just say yell at people, but again, giving threats and violent actions is not on. But that had that has taken off in the last few years. And I wanted to give an example of what has happened in Vancouver South, where the Liberal Party nominee was Ujjal Dosanjh, who was not a pro-Khalistan member of parliament. He would take on them. And from there, you've got to Harjit Sajjan, who's done flip-flop. And in between, Wai Young won the seat in 2011 as a Conservative Party candidate. So my question is, even within the Canadian, like in the Khalistani community, like, supporting folks in Canada, there has been that transition where they've gotten more hardline in the last 10 years.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's Trudeau in enabling. When you enable bad behavior, you get more bad behavior. When you stop bad behavior, you get less
That's
bad
what
behavior.
I was coming towards.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
exactly.
I mean, I make this, thing on geopolitics all the time. It's like one of my things to explain, like, a lot of parts of the world are not Canada, Switzerland, okay? When Canada and Switzerland have a problem, we can talk about it. We can say, oh, this, and that. Pakistan's not Switzerland. The Islamic Republic of Iran is not Switzerland. There are places in the world, in most places, where might makes right, and you have to push back on something. This goes also internally to the Khalistani movement. There, I think, geopolitics is just Game of Thrones without dragons, right? And one of the truths in life is the night is dark and full of terrors, and it must be confronted. There are bad things in the world, things that go bump in the night, and it is the responsibility of good men to stand up to evil to make the world a better place.
Exactly.
If you allow something to fester, if you allow evil to go unchecked, if you allow people to get up on stage and say, Hindus, kill, 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 you're going to get more of that. Conversely, when you see evil actions and you push back against them, right? This started a disaster. The Air India bombing was a travesty of justice. There was one guy arrested. He served 15 minutes in jail. It's an absolute travesty, and it hasn't gotten better on that. So the more you enable bad behavior from bad actors, the more bad behavior you will get. You cannot sit down with the Khalistani leadership and, can we talk about a solution here to no. You need to find the guys openly advocating for death and violence. They need to be deported, extradited, face criminal charges, have actual backlash, because Canada is a country that is quite vociferous in litigating hate speech laws. We will go after someone for a mean comment, but only if it fits within a center-left establishment narrative. So if there's like, it's like a double-ended racism, you could say, right? Yeah. An airplane full of Hindus gets blown up, or Hindus are under attack in Canada, right? Yeah. You have a problem where it's not so much that, the white people aren't the victims, we don't care. It's more, there's no white people involved, so we don't care. For, you could say, two different reasons. One, maybe the racism, in-group, out-group. Who cares? They're just a bunch of brown people, the jingoistic classical racism of in-group, out-group, right? Some Hindus died. What's it to me? I'm not Hindu. Okay, that might be part of it. The other half of it is like the more modern racism, which is the intersectional type, the intersectional framework, where we have, there's white, then there's Asian, then there's brown, then there's black, then there's Muslim, and
subgrouping racism.
Yeah, the subgrouping racism. But it gets to the point where we only want to fight racism when it fits within an easy narrative, when it can be like, white people being mean to black people, racism, thing. But when it's, black people who attacked Asian Americans, we don't want to. So when it's Khalistani radicals attacking Hindus, whoa, because we don't know who's there. We can't turn this into a very easy Western ideology of them versus them. We don't know who the oppressor is, the oppressed. Yeah. So more, I can't, and also the brown people who are saying the kill, kill, kill towards other brown people here, they don't know better. They're not as civilized. They haven't taken enough gender studies course. This is a product of colonialism or whatever it is, right? So that's sort of racism of low expectations, type the soft bigotry of low expectations, the classic George Bush quote. I think both sides of that play into it, and both are dangerous to Hindu Canadians. And yeah, the racist, jingoistic white people are bad, and we confront that as a society. But the bigger problem for Hindu Canadians, and I think Americans now, is the radical left and the elements that have infiltrated the progressive left over the last few decades, Islamists, Khalistanis, communists. They're anti-India and they're anti-Hindu. And that's a reality that a lot of Hindus need to wake up to right now and confront, because You can't, I mean, the Jewish community did this for years, just like lemmings off a cliff, giving our monies to the institutions and the universities. As the universities grew more and more and more anti-Semitic, we didn't want to acknowledge the truth. We wanted to hold out hope and belief that we believe in education and we can get into education, we can make a difference, and we can just, just rise above it. And no, because they're people who really, really hate Jews, and they're dedicated to destroying Israel or undermining, and that's what they're doing. And if you're just sitting there like, oh, we're just going to go outside and go for a walk and I'll become a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer or something and then have a life, like, that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But again, the nefarious...
It's great at a personal level. As a personal growth, you can have that aspirational. But then there's also some community sort of things where, if you're being attacked as a community, what you do. And that's what a lot of Hindus are saying. But there's something else also, Daniel, I wanted to say, because a lot of people forget what kind of a drug problem exists in Punjab. So I think this is why India gets a little antsy about Punjab as well, because from 1985 to 1995, the terrorism problem, the Khalistani problem, was huge in Punjab, and the Indian state had to clamp down in terms of finding a way out, because otherwise the Punjabi Hindus were being threatened. Even the Sikhs were being threatened. There were names being sort of, oh, this Sikh is an agent of the industry, or if the Sikh refused to stand with the Khalistanis. And there are more Sikhs who are not Khalistanis, like in India especially. I would say that number
in
is
Canada
in excess
too,
of 90. Yeah. No, in Canada, no, I know. But I'm saying in Canada, the percentage might be different in India because there's just so many volume. It's like 95%. And in Canada, it could be that much percent as well. Who knows?
I would say the Khalistani to non-Khalistani ratio is probably higher in Canada than it is in India. It's still majority. I'd say the ratio is probably higher here, but he's going to be tolerated here. So if you're a Khalistani, why not come to Canada? Right? Yeah. Like, what's the best place in the world for a Khalistani radical? Canada. Canada. Like, if I believed in violent ethnic separatism in the Punjab region, well, I wouldn't move because I'm in Canada. But I would, I could grab a microphone and turn this channel into a Khalistani radio network now, and I'd be fine. I would never have to worry about ever being accused of hatred. Again.
There's a strange social media network where if someone tweets out one conspiracy theories, they'll have 800 retweets in like one and a half days. And it would be like this 90-year-old dude died of a heart attack, and they're like, no, but India turned off the defibrillator from like Delhi or some shit like that. And people will
I've seen, which is why I also say when we're talking about an intelligence report, some people ask like, so if I have to put money in Vegas, I'm like, what's Trudeau talking about? A credible link to a potential whatever. We've all seen these Khalistani conspiracy theories. Right. I've gotten some in my DMs. I've gotten some in Twitter things. I've done this for years. I've seen Khalistani conspiracy theories. And you accurately outlined the level of conspiracy that you're dealing with. So I will say on instinct and experience that there's a 99% chance that the intelligence agencies receive the same DMing nonsense that I do, especially when their leaders was killed. So is it so crazy to say that there's people within the intelligence agencies whose job it is to collate information and take it in, who might have collated all this Khalistani conspiracy nonsense about the Indian government, potentially looked into it and made a file about the potential links between the Indian government and this? And that's probably what Trudeau's going on. And I would also say, if it's anyone who has half a brain in intelligence, like this is the other thing, is like, you can pretty much prove motive on the Indian government. You could say, hypothetically, like, what their motive? Well, this guy's a terrorist, right? According to them, he's a terrorist. He's an Interpol Red Notice, guns, separatism, and violence and all that. Of course, the Indian government's going to be looking at him. So, and like, but then you have to like prove like, okay, so you have motive, you have opportunity because they're the Indian government. Any major government can kill one person in the world. Like you have opportunity. But you don't have reasonable doubt. Not even close, right? You don't have a weapon. You don't have a time. You don't have a
suspect.
You don't have a suspect. There's no suspect. There's no weapon. And also the two things I laid out, the motive and opportunity, it doesn't get you beyond reasonable doubt because the motive isn't even concrete. Like, what does India stand to gain from the death of Harjit Singh Nijjar? Like, let's say there was no conflict. Let's say he was just gunned down and this didn't become a media thing. Like, what if we found the gang member who did it and it was okay, whatever. So their gain is, okay, there's one less Khalistani guy running around Canada. Is that going to kill the Khalistani movement? No. Like, and the risk is like this. Like the risk of carrying out an extrajudicial assassination is what India's going through right now in this row, which, yeah, we're not there. I think India will come out cleaner than Canada in terms of scale, but neither side really benefits from this. It's just who loses the least is going to be declared the winner. So what was a Khalistani referendum outbreak violence 1987 repeating itself 10 minutes away from happening, and we were just one Harjit Singh Najjar speech and internet video away from absolute chaos in the Punjab region? I don't think so. So the risk reward factor doesn't go there. And also the sort of, if you want to go suspect and motive, okay, if the Indian government is around Harjit Singh Najjar, it doesn't necessarily mean to kill him, right? The reason, there's a very reasonable explanation as to why an Indian government agent or spy would be around this guy, because you look at everything he's said and done, and I could see this report saying, hey, here's all this information about India and stuff, and every bad thing India's ever done was been sent to them by the Khalistanis, have been sifted through, and say, okay, potential. And then I'm sure if Canadian intelligence is competent enough, was Indian intelligence sniffing around this guy? Probably. If I was the Prime Minister of India, I would. I mean, if there was a guy like this in India talking about reviving the FLQ, which was a separatist terrorist group back in the 70s in Quebec, if there was a guy in India talking about reviving the FAQ and death to English-speaking Canadians and English-speaking people in the world, I would probably have a CSIS agent somewhere near him, or try and get into things, monitor
or the IRA. Like when the Irish Republican, like the whole in Boston, the allegations about how much MI6 was probing, during the whole IRA fracas when it was there, because the problem is the violence and the repercussions that it has. But you're right, like India would be in some ways it would be stupid to think. And one thing, and I think we'll wrap up the part, we're going to the last part of it. That if Canada's only steadfast ally, unconditional support on this or on anything is Pakistan, you really, really have to check your position very carefully. That what have you done that Pakistan is getting your unconditional
with my Indian visa getting canceled, it's Christmas in Pakistan this year, guys.
Okay, I would be very careful in which part of Pakistan you're celebrating Christmas or you're allowed to celebrate Christmas.
Yeah, I have no need for a very expensive and convoluted suicide. So my mission to Pakistan and the Islamic Republic of Iran and Russia and North Korea has been canceled. My cross dictatorship tour was canceled by the woke mob.
Yeah. It's just so funny. Sadly, you think, and even a lot of Pakistanis are privately laughing. Like if you talk to, like, Twitter again is noise, but if you talk to reasonable Pakistani voices who are looking at this, they'll be coming like, "Ye kya bakwas kar rahe?" I mean, who are these people? Jumping up and down and stuff. He's like, this is between India and Canada. Why do we even need to speak up on this issue? In fact, the more we're speaking, the more it's probably pushing Trudeau into doing like a thaw, and I agree with that. But I have to ask you this for sure: in all the Indian channels and all the counter viewpoints that you've heard in the last 5 days, what was the absolute funniest you've heard?
In like the counter Indian channels?
Yeah, or counter viewpoint, like you've heard, like it's something that you're like, what the F? I was given that.
I mean, the craziest thing I've heard, nothing can top Justin Trudeau. Nothing can top nothing can top the Liberal government. Like, you can't be crazier than these ding-dongs. Yeah. Like, I've been in spaces where, people come on and they're lefty and they're convoluting it, and you had some, Pakistanis, come into spaces and go off on India and outright say that India's taken responsibility for it when they didn't. Like, I've heard nonsense. Also, I have so many notifications and DMs and whatever. I don't spend time scrolling through my feed to find the biggest death threat or most insane Khalistani nonsense. Since I made that 15-minute video, I have not looked at my Twitter where it hasn't been on max notifications. So I don't have time to search through to find people who say crazy things. Like, I'm trying to be judicious with my time. I'm trying to, do the thing, the opportunities. I get on people's podcasts, put information out there. Like I'm trying to do something productive. And
absolutely.
And I really appreciate everyone in my DM sending me things to try and get a hold of me. I'm managing, but I'm not getting back to you right now because I'm doing this podcast, and then I'll take 15 minutes, and then someone else is going to call me, and then I haven't even eaten today. So like it's been a blur, and I'm barely sleeping, and I get a link, and I go into a Zoom meeting or a StreamYard, and I appear somewhere, and I don't really remember which TV network I promised I do the 24 hours before.
I'm gonna tell you this, Daniel, and to all the Canadians watching and listening to this as well. The allegations and the insanity that you've heard in the last 4 days is not India. This is India. Because when we love someone, it is a shower of love. It is everyone's, and India is going to be, there's also going to be brickbats that come your way because, it's not India if it's, out of 160 people absolutely want to hug you and 40 people want to punch you. But the 60 people will make sure they're hugging you that closely that they're going to take the punches before
India,
they get to
I
you.
appreciate it, but I am very used to being a love 'em or hate 'em proposition.
Yes.
There's very little in between with me. It's yes, no,
or
yes,
you're
no.
You're getting the full Indian blast of absolute madness. But no, I appreciate you've been very patient with your time, and I appreciate your viewpoints on this. But before we wrap up, any closing thoughts, and B, we have a tradition on Mind Podcast where we recommend something beyond politics, like a book or a show or something. So any recommendations you have for our folks? That you've something you've read.
Okay, sweet. Okay, nerd time. Daniel's very cool. I'm a lover of epic fantasy. That's my jam. I love Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere universe. I think it's great. And my favorite series is the Stormlight Archive. And if you care about Game of Thrones is more geopolitics, but I do like, if you want a magic system, whatever, that has a good moral compass, it's very interesting in codes of what is honor and duty and it's a very interesting book for people both left and right. I think there's a lot of good left. I think it's obviously non-political, but if you want a good non-political, if epic fantasy is your thing, I would recommend that. And then you can DM me with your thoughts on the books, and I will respond to that. If you do DM me questions about the Stormlight Archive or crazy theories you have about it, that will get a response eventually. I can guarantee that. That would be my one recommendation. If people can read the nerdy books that I read more, so I can talk to someone about them who won't just go, that would be nice.
Absolutely. My two recommendations are going to be two completely opposite. One is obviously Terry Milowski's big book on AI 182. Read that book for sure. Yeah. But there's an interesting book I'm reading, and it's by a Yale professor on J. Edgar Hoover called G-Man. And I may have given this recommendation, but it's so pertinent about intelligence and American intelligence establishment. So right now, if you find people being a little too goody two-shoes from the U.S. side about what U.S. intelligence has done or can do, please read this book and the legacy of J. Edgar Hoover. You're going to get, and that's not just for Indians, even for Canadians, because it's fascinating to see what's happened. But this has been, and I will definitely be reading the books and the show that you recommended. I love fantasy stuff as well. So,
Oh yeah, then DM me. Maybe we'll do a Brandon Sanderson podcast.
Exactly. Who knows? Next time we'll do a fantasy podcast or something. Things will. And we'll that'll be definitely more serious than this podcast.
I go so in depth.
Absolutely.
You could get me to take that more seriously than the country of Canada.
No, I love the country of Canada.
I love it too. I love this country. I have such a love for it. I have some crazy videos about like Canadian history and World War I. Like I'm a nerd for this country. Yeah. I love what we stand for.
My friend told me, is like Canada's was one thing, like that they were the ones you were sending everywhere in World War I, and Canada lost so many soldiers that by come World War II, they did not have the same force they did in World War I, just in the amount. Because of the wild, things like they did in World War I. So it's
that's actually the opposite story. That goes for the most Western world. Canada and Australia, they actually Arthur Currie the first time the Canadian Army was actually formed under Canadian command, pioneered modern warfare, combined arms tactics, and actually pioneered using artillery to cover the infantry and redesigned it to actually protect the troops and do more battle thing. And that's how the Canadians broke Vimy Ridge, the hardest spot, by clever tactics and a real practical non-European approach. If you want to recommend something, it's not politics. I think I did a Vimy Ridge one. If you're Canadian, I have a video on Vimy Ridge that should set off your patriotism. Pretty good. It's one of my favorite things. I did it at the 100-year anniversary of Vimy Ridge back in 2017. So if you get Canadian history, you're a history nerd, a Canada nerd, you want to learn about World War I in Canada, that's my Daniel recommendation.
Yeah, so that's what I'd heard. Like World War I, yeah, Canada's response was something else. But well, I have to end with that. So we ended nothing. We hope that the first war or the diplomatic war stays a diplomatic thaw, and then a better thing, and doesn't go into a diplomatic war. The only wars that we want to ever talk about are in the past, not the ones in present or future. But I appreciate Daniel for joining me today. This has been a fantastic discussion, and we hope to have you soon on my podcast. Please follow Daniel on social media. We'll tweet out his handle, and we'll tweet out this podcast. Like, share, subscribe, guys, to our channel, and we'll be back soon. Till then, it's goodbye.